Hi to all of you. This is a collective presentation. My name is Suzanne Aasman. I'm from the Netherlands, just like Jesper, from the University of Groningen. And I'm presenting together with Anat Ben David. She's from the Open University of Israel, and also present here, but in the room, is Niels Brügger from Aarhus, University Denmark, and we just heard him speak in the session before. So he's present, but is also a listener at the same time. Welcome here to the Enter the Trading Zone of the WACnet. When we thought about this presentation, we were thinking more of a smaller space, not this grand auditorium. So, but let's pretend we're in a smaller room, and if you like to interact with us during our presentation, then please feel free to do so. Because what we aim to do is somehow reflect on the fact that much of the work that we do as researchers, or much of the work that we do as web archivists or as IT specialists, helps us with doing our work, but also comes sometimes with great questions and issues that we want to work together on. And I already had to laugh a bit, Jesper, when you said, "Oh, I didn't know you were here from the Internet Archive. Oh, I didn't know you were here." And I think that's one of the great benefits of these types of conference where we all meet together. So that's part also of what has been the project, which is called WACnet, the WACnet community, which was an initiative taken by Niels Brügger and funded by the Danish government, that brought together web archivists, researchers, and IT people to together think about setting up studies into Web Archive and develop a network that could somehow build this new field of interest. It started in 2020 and it ended last summer, 2023, and it brought together a great number of people. Initially, I think it was about 24, and then it grew into like almost 40 people, researchers, on a senior level, but also graduate students and even master students, IT specialists, web archivists, information specialists, data managers, and data scientists. So a great diversity of people that came together and worked on the issues related to web archiving. So I wasn't there when it started. I was allowed to enter that trading zone somewhere, I think, in the fall of the first year. And then it was already COVID, as you might remember, so March 2020, yeah. It started, and then for me it was very beneficial. I don't know about all the others, but it was so easy to join this community. You just put on your computer, and then you could enter this community. And it was not a very passive community. It turned out to be very active. So along came workshops, datathons. There was a great productivity in terms of white papers or reports that were published online, presentations. Some of them did interviews, oral histories of the special collections that were formed, and luckily, in between the waves of COVID, we could also meet in person in different places in Europe, so social events together with great food, which really was beneficial in, I think, if looking back at those 3 years, it was extended because of COVID, so we could work longer on all of these issues, that we were able to establish a great corpus of work, so to speak. And now the project has ended, but we have just finished a book. All the people who were part of the WACnet community, and together we have this edited volume that was just accepted by Routledge, yes. And the name is the Routledge Companion to Transnational Web Archive Studies, which is a kind of report on all the topics that we discussed during these stages. And one of them being COVID. I mean, it was both a challenge and also an opportunity that COVID happened. And that turned out to be the real transnational event that we were looking for to discuss and to study. So I think when I look back at the reports, there were some ideas which transnational event might be interesting to study. Well, it happened, right? It happened to all of us in that time. So and also it turned out that having a web archivist in our group who are also working on this special collections in different national archives, but also by the IIPC, gave us a very unique opportunity. I think, as a historian, it's very special, I think, to be part of an event as a person, while at the same time also thinking about it in terms of heritage as something that you can archive and study. So that's basically what happened. It was collected and also at the same time thought about how then to study this and how to work with these types of collections. And now there's so what I wanted to add to this is thinking back at this whole process. It is interesting to think about this in terms of what does it mean when all these different communities come together, web archivists with their backgrounds, or librarians, IT specialists, or researchers with their specific questions. Do we all speak the same language? And of course, I'm not talking about English, but do we all use the same terminology when we talk about concepts? Do we have the same things in mind there as well? So how to establish some kind of interdisciplinary partnership, and is it all on a kind of balanced level? Is not one overtaking it, but maybe the technical language can sometimes be the jargon used, or is it more that the researchers-oriented approach is more dominant? So how to find a shared language in which you can work? And you can see here a model that was developed by some sociologists who worked on the idea of a trading zone. If you enter as disciplines and start collaborating, how does that work? So there's been a lot of theory about this, and I think somewhere you should point about this, right? About this, before I'm exploding something. I think this is the interesting part of that zone, where you talk about collaboration that is not so much dominated by one, but where there is interactional expertise. So where you can make use of the expertise of the different parties, so to speak, but where you also sometimes encounter what is called boundary objects. So that is a terminology that was developed by. It's very slow, right?
Yeah, we have to wait.
Yeah. Sorry. So here you can see some, but I'm not going too deep into this, but the idea of a boundary object where if groups come together, you start thinking about this shared language. It was a concept developed, for instance, by Susan Leigh-Start in collaboration with others, but she's one of the main scholars in this field from a more ethnographic approach, looking at what happens in that at that moment. So a boundary object is, there's loads of articles about this, but it somehow gives us, I think, the tools to think about certain concepts and how to employ them and how to find a common ground to think about these. So they don't have a very specific definition, but while working with them, you might need to make them more concrete, and so it can happen that the different meanings change from specific social groups to the other. This sounds a bit abstract, right? So it might be good to give it a bit more concrete, give some more concrete examples. One of them maybe, Anat, and I give now the floor to you. We use the word transnational in our book, and we have this transnational event. Could that be an example of a boundary object?
Yeah, certainly, and I think Jesper also just mentioned the word transnational in some of the expectations of a web sphere, right? Or expecting a very particular definition of transnational as something that is perhaps involves collaboration from various countries. But when looking at how different groups interpret what transnational is, we came to discover that it might be perhaps conflating with international, especially when looking at web archives, which have some transnational elements, but mostly they are created in national contexts. So what is transnational web archive studies? Is it transnational studies of web archives wherever they are, or there is such an ontological object called a transnational web archive? Whether or not we have such an object, I think it's still debatable. But throughout working through WorkNet and on the book, I think we came up with several interpretations of what the transnational is in web archives and in web archive studies, and at least to make the differences in those interpretations more expressive or more, let's say, defined.
Yeah, and it was also interesting because you can think about the web as being transnational originally. So there's also this historical dimension of how the web evolved and how archives, different archives have come into being, starting with the Internet Archive.
Also, we are setting now in a conference organized by an organization that may be understood as a transnational organization or perhaps international, looking at the Internet Archive as perhaps a transnational endeavor, but maybe not, maybe also very US-centric in some of its premises. So that very question of taking just that one word of what is transnational in the web or in web archives or in web archive studies as a boundary object, and looking at how different groups interpret. Well, we all use transnational, but each of us assigns a different meaning to that word. So that's a very interesting way to look. Well, it's kind of an instrument for us to look inside the assumptions of different disciplinary groups.
And another interesting concept that came up in the chapters and also relates a bit to your talk is community. What is community? One of the chapters is about Chinese and French communities in London and how to define as a web archive, which web archive should you then collect, which website should you then collect? Is it based on language or on culture, on social? And if you define as an archive, the example you gave about the AIDS, for instance, like who is to define that community? So that was another boundary object, maybe where you can have different opinions as researchers, but also as a community itself. 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes. So should I ask you maybe
okay.
to give another example, perhaps around the COVID-19 collection curated by the IIPC and how you worked with that in a group of interdisciplinary researchers?
Yeah, so we also, we had the novel coronavirus collection we had access to, and one of the ideas was to do a study on gender related to this COVID collection, and we had a datathon, for instance, in Luxembourg, where we tried to identify our topic, and Valerie is also there, and Frédéric. We had big discussions, not just about the approach, quantitative or qualitative, but also in relation to gender. How then to define it? Is it about feminism? Is it about gender and COVID and homeschooling? Or so what words should we use? And then being in a collection with different languages, I think we took up at least a few hours just to identify our object of study. Also to make it either quantifiable or to start working with this more qualitative approach, and then including the data scientist who was also there thinking like, okay, how should I make this work then? So this took us, I think, 2 days, and then we finally split up and tried different approaches all along. But it shows that something that seems like everyone is thinking about the same from the same premise doesn't work all the time.
Mm.
I think our time is up. Yeah. Can I just close up?
Yeah.
So there are some great lessons learned, and the book hopefully will be published in the fall. August? Okay. So cross-disciplinary, cross-national, cross-institutional approaches, and I hope it's a great read. And behind the scenes, of course, there's always a lot of work on this. But anyway, thanks for listening, and you may now leave this trading zone, although keep seated because we have one more to go. Thank you. Nothing for myself.